Hi everyone, thank you for watching. Today I have Ms. Karuna Nundy with me. I don't think she needs any introduction whatsoever, but if at all I had to introduce her, I would say she studied economics and then moved on to doing law. Apart from, of course, being involved in several cases in India, she's also worked with the UN and been involved in development and in policy initiatives in several developing countries, which include Bhutan, Maldives, and Nepal, among many others. Her contribution, although to the legal space and legal reform, is nothing short of exemplary. She's been described by Mint as an agent of change, which she really has been through her involvement in leading matters such as the Nirbhaya case and involvement in drafting the anti-rape laws, the Section 66A matter, as well as representing Bhopal gas tragedy victims, among many other cases. I'm so grateful to have you here, ma'am. Thank you for joining us in the Her Forum team for this discussion.
Thank you so much for having me, Ravina. And I'm always delighted to talk to colleagues that are younger and not, not a non-male, because I think that there aren't enough of us. So we must encourage each other.
Thank you. On that note, I think I wanted to start by asking you that your journey has been nothing short of really stand out, in other words. From working on domestic matters to even your international involvement has been phenomenal. So how did this career trajectory really come about?
That's really kind. You don't, I think, necessarily chart a trajectory. That's not true. I'm quite a planner. I'm quite a planner, actually, and after law school in Cambridge, I wasn't, I felt like I had more learning to do abroad, and I went to Columbia and then I worked there. It was important to me to have an international career even then. And I did the bar exam in New York. Again, not knowing where any of that would lead, but a bit like Everest, it was there. And so I felt while I was studying, while I still had the capacity to study, I'd better do it. And it's much easier for Indians because basically it requires a bunch of rote learning, which we're very good at, right? So I did that, and I didn't know where it would lead. And I then worked for the UN, which is not American, it's international, obviously, and which laid the base for that. Work was interesting. It wasn't, I can't say it was super exciting, the work at the time, but then it led to much more interesting work as I sort of did more and more of it, and got more and more experience in it. So I think that was useful. I think for me, the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam idea has always been quite visceral, you know. Um, Whether it's, and I think it's a nuanced notion, because when the Indian cricket team takes the knee for Black Lives Matter, when there are the kinds of atrocities going on in our own country, it's completely ridiculous. However, when I was in New York, the Rwandan genocide happened, and I feel like there's a reason that you have the idea of use Gogans, because viscerally, if we are plugged into our consciences, I think that idea that it's all of our responsibility is there. Um, when I moved back, I think I always felt that I wanted to be sort of one of those people that has a international career while sort of having a deep career here, um, because just because you live, people who live in New York and London presume that they are leading the world, the globe in particular areas, right? And I think that you need perspectives, you need leadership from other parts of the world, whether it's in international arbitration or whether it's in treaty drafting. If you look at the bilateral investment treaties and the way it was so oppressive of developing countries, whether it is how you think about climate change and mitigation, versus trying to impose only trying to impose obligations on emerging economies. Um, and also in a sort of, I mean, these are just examples, whether it's the internet, whether it's different areas of legal policy and hard, and law, right? I think leadership from India, global leadership from India, is something that is essential. And that I'm so glad that I see the sort of newer generations of lawyers doing more and more and more, um, and aiming to do more and more, including our common friend who is kind of, looking to train in that area. I don't know if that answers your question, but I've always sort of planned and seen what happens also.
Thank you. And I think those, 12 voices, as we call them, are so
Yeah,
important to bring about this balanced view of how we can tackle, big changes and how
yeah,
we work towards it together.
yeah,
On that note, I mean, if from an Indian context, at least, it's a long way off to contribute internationally, but even
yeah.
within our own space, what do you think have been key legislative or judicial changes that have impacted these marginalized communities, including women?
Um, I think the Vishaka case and the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act was a big one. I mean, the Vishaka case more than the Prevention of Sexual Harassment Act, that came in 2013, right? And I think that was a big one because that was one of the legislations, as well as the legislation that was brought in after the Mathura case, giving voice to a woman who gives testimony in a rape case, right? And saying that it has the same weight as as some other witnesses, because why should it not? Um, Thereby increasing the chances of conviction in the cases where it is required. Um, Also, the criminal law amendment bill that I helped with, that recognized from a feminist perspective different kinds of violation of the body and violation of privacy, you know, um, to be criminal. What's interesting around these legislative changes that I mentioned actually is that around many of them they came off the back of movements. And for those of us who were, there in 2012, I think one of the most, and those of us who were, Delhi's citizens, it was very powerful and moving to see people stand up and say that this is not just your problem. This is not your personal problem and your family and your few supporters. This is something that we all stand against. This is something that you as a citizen are entitled to. You are entitled to freedom. You are entitled to walk the streets when you wish, you know, that it's not about protection, it's about bekhauf azadi. Um, and I think that these shifts that the women's movements have brought have been incredibly powerful. The thing is that patriarchy is something that is very sticky. It's very um, structural. It's like sort of there like a hard block, you know. Um, and I think that as lawyers, we all have a very serious opportunity to bash away at it and to with our allies, with our sort of male and other allies for women and queer people across the board, right? To tilt that arc of the moral universe towards justice.
Thank you. I do remember I was graduating from school in Calcutta, and I remember
Right.
when the Nirbhaya case took place, when there was so much activism around the time that
Yeah.
people, even in my city, from my school, we had a candle march, and it just created such an impact, which
Yeah.
led to the anti-rape bill and the final
Yeah.
amendment. And I think that's really given us internally so much more confidence than we had before, even in terms of just stepping out or wearing what you wanted. So I think, thank you for your involvement in that and bringing about that change as well. It's
Thank you for yours. I mean, I think it took then and it takes now everybody together, right? Like it's not,
Yeah.
yeah.
On that note, I wanted to ask you, which have been personally for you, of all the landmark cases you've been a part of, or non-landmark, in your opinion, which have been the ones that have impacted you or touched you the most? If you had to pick maybe one or two.
It's a tough one, but I'll just tell you the cases that come to mind immediately. There was the Jija Ghosh case where I was appearing for the institution for ADAPT, and at that hearing, it was about a woman with disability who's a real leader in her field. Like, in fact, she was on her way to Goa, I think, to advise on policy, and I had heard her sometime before, like on a stage, watching her receive a national medal, and she got taken off a flight because she was frothing at the mouth, which is something that some people with cerebral palsy do, and it's normal, right? And they said they wouldn't take off without her. It was deeply humiliating. And I argued the case for ADAPT. Colin was for Jija, and together I was very focused on damages, on money, because there's something that we were looking at for Jija, because we were looking at rule changes, etc. And I think those were important. But the DGCA already has, pretty good rules. And then the idea was to strengthen them and to make it that much more accountable. But I think that behavior is changed not just by a rap on the knuckle, but also by damages, and particularly corporate behavior, right? Um, and so that's something I felt was memorable partly because of the way that we did it. You know, Jija came in to the courtroom and sat a little bit against the rules, I admit, sat sat right behind the front row, you know. I think putting the litigant front and center, even physically, is something that's relevant. The dignity aspect is something that um, was a very big part of our arguments. And Justice Sikri wrote a really, really fantastic judgment, you know, and it was primarily on dignity. And I think that is something that serves us as we go forward, um, looking at dignity when a gay couple is denied recognition of their marriage, a queer couple. And some of these people that I'm arguing for now in the Delhi High Court are really, really sort of pillars of society kind of couples, you know. Um, and I think for them, for some of them, this idea of dignity is really central. Um, in this sort of line of cases, I had argued for a film called No Fathers in Kashmir that the government had effectively banned. Now, the order was coming around just after Pulwama, right? I think that's when the last hearing was. So it was a very sensitive time. And No Fathers in Kashmir, they had sort of asked for various cuts, and they said, we're not going to release it without that, and hence the ban. And we sought a UA certificate, and Justice Manmohan Sareen, who was leading the tribunal, I thought in an act of constitutional leadership, you know, um, gave that UA certificate. And I felt it was very important because today we have the courts and the tribunals are very much a bastion of individual rights, because you have so much that is happening through intimidation, and because people are scared. Um, and so for me, that was something that was that comes to mind right now.
Thank you. Those are very powerful things that took place, and as a result of act, I would say even legal activism and judicial
What
involvement in
activism?
certain cases.
Legal work.
Not say
Legal
judicial
constitution.
activism, that's a strong term nowadays, but
No, it's not that. I just,
conscientiousness.
honestly, like I've never I have a lot of respect for activists, and I represent activists a lot. But I think that when you are looking to enforce law and looking for law to progress, right? I think that calling that activism is something that I personally don't identify at all. I identify as a lawyer. Um, but I also think it's actually not entirely correct, you know? Because what are you going to say? What are we going to say about the Constitution? That it's an activist document? No, it's not, right? It's a social contract by which we all live together. It's a social contract that is meant to govern our relationship with each other as citizens, our relationship to companies, our relationship to government, and bringing that into everyday lives is surely the job of every lawyer, right?
Very true.
Even if you're working honestly, like on a B2B basis, it's
Very
the same
true.
stuff.
I think that brings me to my next question. I read somewhere that whenever you decide on taking on matters, you apply a care test. Can you
Yes.
elaborate a little bit on that for, us budding younger female lawyers to have as a benchmark for ourselves going forward?
I can't remember exactly what it was that I said. It was to a lay audience. But what I would say um, to our colleagues is that, you know, we have one short, sweet life, right? Um, and after a point, you're going to stop caring what other people think. You know, if you find that early, if you find that feeling early, and you tap into what you care about, what do we care about? You know, this case, so what, and who cares, right? Um, I think the earlier the better, and the deeper it connects with one, the more likely that you will bring everything that you have to the table to try and win that case for your client. And by this, look, I also really think that much of the work of doing good, right, falls on women disproportionately, right? Because it's, the expectation is that आपको घर तो नहीं चलाना ना, right? Um, and I don't think that's true. सबको घर चलाना होता है, सबको practice चलानी होती है, right? तो in that regard, and I think this doesn't get spoken enough, I think it's very important for one to figure out what it is that one's going to do, how one's going to align one's values and one's um, resource needs and one's goals. You know, for me, that means that even if a case is very fancy and very highly paid, if it doesn't align with my values, I'm not going to do it. Right. Um, in a B2B case, this is going to tend to be unlikely, but it's not impossible. Um, there was a business case involving government, hugely lucrative, that I recently said no to. Yeah, I think that one has to be completely aligned, you know, in what one is going to do, and then at the end of the day, you're going to feel more or less happy with yourself. right? Because I mean, not happy with yourself in a smug, self-satisfied way, hopefully. But I think that, that Socrates' definition of happiness, feeling integrated within yourself and without.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
on a last very personal note, I mean, you've received so many accolades, including from, Forbes, among other organizations, but which one is closest to you?
Many years ago, Mint wrote the one that you cited. Actually, I don't know which one is closest, but I think that Mint done, had sort of called me an agent of change. And it was written by someone who's very thoughtful, Soma Ghoshal, who's very thoughtful. And I feel like the conversation that we had helped me at the time formulate where I was and why I was doing what I was doing, you know? And the thing is, so that felt important to me. And like, it's something that I've always that's what I've always wanted to do. So that was dear to me. But, I think the thing to remember, Ravina, is that um, the recognition and gazing into the middle distance in front of court, low angle photograph, right? It has its place, like it's icing, but it's not, it's the icing on the cake. It's nice, you know? It's nice, and it's lovely it's lovely to have recognition, and um, but it's not the cake. That stuff can't actually fuel one. And I think that the fuel is the sort of flow that one gets from the work day to day. The fuel is if one sort of manages to have the impact in terms of uh, whether it's just winning a case for a corporate client, or helping change people's lives who are in a difficult situation. Um, and the fuel is also, for me, contributing to a shift in the conversation, however small or large, towards constitutionality and dignity and respect and rights.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so well put, and inspiring for the rest of us to hear. Thank you so much for your time and for agreeing to speak to us. And I'm sure this is going to impact a lot of other women, female professionals, and who are going to come back many years later in their own interviews and attribute what you've just said, to really helping shape how they decide to move further with their careers. So thank
That's
you
very
so much.
kind, Ravina, and thank you so much for having me.